5 of a series of unfortunate events. The Ersatz Elevator, Book 6. This part, I'll read 9 and 10. Here's the picture for Chapter 9. Chapter 9. One of the greatest myths in the world, and the phrase greatest myths is just a fancy way of saying big fat lies, is that troublesome things get less and less troublesome if you do them more and more. People say this myth when they are teaching children to ride bicycles, for instance, as though falling off a bicycle and skinning your knee is less and less troublesome the 14th time you did it than it is the first time. The truth is that troublesome things tend to remain troublesome no matter how many times you do them, and that you should avoid doing them unless they are absolutely urgent. Obviously, it was absolutely urgent for the Baudelaire orphans to take another 3-hour climb down the terrible darkness of the elevator shaft. The children knew that the Quagmire triplets were in grave danger, and that using Violet's invention to melt the bars of the cage was the only way that their friends could escape before Gunther hid them inside one of the items of the inn auction and smuggled them out of the city. But I'm sorry to say that the absolute urgency of the Baudelaire's second climb did not make it any less troublesome. The passageway was still as dark as a bar of extra dark chocolate sitting in a planetarium covered in a thick black blanket, even with the tiny glow from the white hot tips of the fire tongs, and the sensation of lowering themselves down the elevator shaft still felt like a descent into the hungry mouth of some terrible creature. With only the clink of the last extension cord hitting the lock of the cage to guide them, the three siblings pulled themselves down the ersatz rope with one hand and held out their welding torches with the other. And the trek down to the tiny, filthy room where the triplets were trapped was not even 1/27th okay. But the dreadful repetition of the Baudelaire's troublesome climb was dwarfed in comparison with the sinister surprise that they found at the bottom, a surprise so terrible that the three children simply refused to believe it. Violet reached the end of the final extension cord and thought it was a hallucination. Claus stood looking at the cage and thought it must be a phantasm, and Sunny peered in through the bars and prayed that it was some combination of the two. The youngsters stared at the tiny, filthy room and stared at the cage, but it took several minutes before they could believe that the Quagmires were no longer inside. "They're gone," Violet said. "They're gone, and it's all my fault." She threw her welding torch in the corner of the tiny room, where it sizzled against the floor. She turned to her siblings, and they could see, by the white glow of their tongs, that their older sister was beginning to cry. "My invention was supposed to save them," she said mournfully, "and now Gunther has snatched them away. I'm a terrible inventor and a horrible friend." Claus threw his welding torch into the corner and gave his sister a hug. "You're the best inventor I know," he said, "and your invention was a good one. Listen to those welding torches sizzle. The time wasn't ripe for your invention, that's all." Claus threw his welding torch into the corner. "Oh, what's that supposed to mean?" Violet said miserably. Sunny threw the last welding torch into the corner, and she took off her oven mitt so she could pat her sister comfortably on the ankle. "No-kay, she said, which meant there. "All it means," Claus said, "is that you invented something that wasn't handy at this particular time. It's not your fault that we didn't rescue them, it's Gunther's." "I guess I know that," Violet said, wiping her eyes. "I'm just sad that the time wasn't ripe for my invention. Who knows if we will ever see our friends again." "We will," Claus said. "Just because the time isn't right for your inventing skills doesn't mean it isn't ripe for my researching skills." "Dwestall," Sunny said sadly, which meant all the research in the world can't help Duncan and Isadora now. "That's where you're wrong, Sunny," Claus said. "Gunther might have snatched them, but we know where he's taking them, to Veblen Hall. He's going to hide them inside one of the items at the inn auction, remember?" "Yes," Violet said, "but which one?" "If we climb back up to the penthouse," Claus said, "and go to the Squalor Library, I think I can figure it out." "Meows," Sunny said, which meant, but the Squalor Library has only those snooty books on what's in and what's out. "You're forgetting the recent addition to the library," Claus said. "Esme told us that Gunther had left a copy of the inn auction catalog, remember? Wherever he's planning to hide the Quagmires, it'll be listed in the catalog. If we can figure out which item he's hiding them in, we can get them out of there," Violet finished, "because he auctions them off." "That's a brilliant idea," Claus It's no less brilliant than inventing welding torches, Claus said. I just hope that the time is right this time. Me too, Violet said. After all, it's our only Vinug, Sunny said, which meant don't say that. And her sister nodded in agreement. There is no use in saying it was their only hope, and getting them as anxious as they were before. So without another word, the Baudelaires hoisted themselves back up on their makeshift rope and began climbing back up to the squalor penthouse. The darkness closed in on them again, and the children began to feel as if their whole lives had been spent in this deep and shadowy pit, instead of in a variety of locations, ranging from a lumber mill in Poultryville to a cave in the shores of Lake Lachrymose, to the Baudelaire mansion, which sat in charred remains just a few blocks away from Dark Avenue. But rather than think about all the shadowy places in the Baudelaire past, or the shadowiest place that they were climbing through now, the three siblings tried to concentrate on the brighter places in the Baudelaire future. They thought of the penthouse apartment, which drew closer and closer to them as they climbed. They thought of the squalor library, which could contain the proper information they needed to defeat Gunther's plan, and they thought of some glorious time that was yet to come, when the Baudelaires and the Quagmires could enjoy their friendship without the ghastly shadow of evil and greed that hung over them now. The Baudelaire orphans tried to keep their minds on these bright thoughts of the future as they climbed up the shadowy elevator shaft, and by the time they reached the sliding doors, they felt that perhaps this glorious time was not so far off. It must almost be morning, Violet said, as she helped Sunny hoist herself out of the elevator doors. We'd better untie our rope from the doorknob and shut these doors, otherwise the squalors will see what we've been up to. Why shouldn't they see? Claus asked. Maybe then they'd believe us about Gunther. No one ever believes us about Gunther, or any of Olaf's other disguises, Violet said, unless we have some evidence. All we have now is an ersatz elevator, an empty cage, and 3 cooling fire tongs. That's not evidence of anything. I suppose you're right, Claus said. Well, why don't you two untie the rope, and I'll go straight to the library and start reading the catalog. Good plan, Violet said. We hop, Sunny said, which meant, and good luck. Claus quietly opened the door of the penthouse and let himself in, and the Baudelaire sisters began pulling the rope back up the shaft. The end of the last extension cord clinked and clinked against the walls of the passageway as Sunny wound up the ersatz rope, until it was a coil of extension cords, curtain poles, and fancy ties. Violet untied the last double knot to detach it from the doorknob and turned to her sister. Let's store this under my bed, she said, in case we need it later. It's on the way to the library anyway. Y'all rel, Sunny added, which meant, and let's shut the sliding elevator doors so the squalors don't see that we've been sneaking around an elevator shaft. Good thinking, Violet said, and pressed the up button. The door slid shut again, and after taking a good look around to make sure they hadn't left anything behind, the 2 Baudelaires walked into the penthouse and followed their breadcrumb trail past a breakfast room, down a hallway, across the standing room, down a hallway, and finally to Violet's room, where they stored the ersatz rope under the bed. They were about to head right to the library when Sunny noticed a note that had been left on Violet's extra fluffy pillow. Dear Violet, Violet read, I couldn't find you or your siblings this morning to say goodbye. I had to leave early to buy yellow paper clips before heading over to the inn auction. Esme will take you to the Veblen Hall at 10:30 sharp, so be sure to be ready, or she'll be very annoyed. See you then. Sincerely yours, Jerome Squalor. Yikes, Sunny said, pointing to the nearest of the 612 clocks that the Squalors owned. Yikes is right, Violet said. It's already 10 o'clock. All that climbing up and down the elevator shaft took longer than I thought. Wretch, Sunny added, which meant something like, not to mention making those welding torches. We better go to the library right away, Violet said. Maybe we can help Claus speed up the research process in some way. Sunny nodded in agreement, and the 2 sisters walked down the hallway to the squalor library. Since Jerome had first shown it to them, Violet and Sunny had scarcely been inside, and it looked like nobody else had used it much either. A good library will never be too neat or too dusty, because somebody will always be in it, taking books off the shelves and staying up late reading them. Even libraries that were not to the Baudelaire's taste, Aunt Josephine's library, for instance, only contained books on grammar, were comfortable places to be in, because the owners of the library used them so much. But the squalor library was as neat and as dusty as could be. All of the dull books on what was in and what was out sat on the shelves in tidy rows with layers of dust on top of them, as if they hadn't been disturbed since they'd first been placed there. It made the Butler sisters a little sad to see all those books sitting in the library unread and unnoticed, like stray dogs or lost children that nobody wanted to take home. The only sign of life in the library was their brother, who was reading the catalog so closely that he didn't look up until his sisters were standing at his side. "I hate to disturb you when you're researching," Violet said, "but there was a note from Jerome on my pillow. Esme is going to take us to Bedwell Hall at 10:30 sharp, and it's past 10 o'clock now. Is there any way we can help you?" "I don't see how," Klaus said, his eyes looking worried behind his glasses. "There's only one copy of the catalog, and it's pretty complicated. Each of the items for auction is called a lot, and the catalog lists each lot with a description and a guess at what the highest bid may be. I've read up to lot 49, which is a valuable postage stamp." "Well, Gunther can't have the Quagmires and a postage stamp," Violet said. "You can skip that lot." "I've been skipping lots of lots," Claus said, "but I'm still no closer to figuring out where the triplets will be. Would Gunther hide them in lot 14, an enormous globe? Would he hide them under the lid of lot 25, a rare and valuable piano? Would he hide them in lot 48, an enormous statue of a scarlet fish?" Claus stopped and turned the page of the catalog. "Or would he hide them in lot 50, which is—" Claus ended his sentence in a gasp, but his sisters knew immediately that he did not mean that the 15th item to be sold at the inn auction was a sharp 50th item to be sold at the inn auction was a sharp intake of breath. He meant he discovered something remarkable in the catalog, and they leaned forward to read over his shoulder and see what it was. "I can't believe it," Violet said. "I simply can't believe it." "Tumsk," Sunny said, which meant this must be where the Quagmires will be hidden. "I agree with Sunny," Claus said. "Even though there's no description of the item, they don't even write what the letters stand for." "We'll find out what they stand for," Violet said, "because we're going to find Esme right this minute and tell her what's going on. When she finds out, she'll finally believe us about Gunther, and we'll get the Quagmires out of lot 50 before they leave the city. You were right, Claus. This time was ripe for your researching skills." "I guess I was right," Claus said. "I can scarcely believe our luck." The Baudelaires looked again at the page of the catalog, making sure that it was neither a hallucination or a phantasm. And it wasn't. Right there, written in neat black type, under the heading Lot 50, were 3 letters and 3 punctuation marks that seemed to spell out the solution to the Baudelaire's problems. The children looked at one another and smiled. All 3 siblings could scarcely believe their luck. The Baudelaire orphans could scarcely believe that those 3 letters spelled out the hiding place of the Quagmires as clearly as it spelled out VFD. Chapter 10's picture. Chapter 10. And one of the items in the catalog is listed VFD, which is a secret the Quagmires tried to tell us about right before they were kidnapped, Claus finished. "This is terrible," Esme said, and took a sip of parsley soda she had insisted on pouring for herself before the Baudelaires could tell her everything that they had discovered. Then she had insisted on settling herself on the innest couch in her favorite sitting room, and that 3 children sit in 3 chairs grouped around her in a semicircle before they could relate the story of Gunther's true identity and the secret passageway behind the sliding elevator doors, and the scheme to smuggle the Quagmires out of the city, and the surprising appearance of those 3 mysterious initials as the description of Lot 50. The 3 siblings were pleased that their guardian had not dismissed their findings, or argued with them about Gunther or the Quagmires or anything else, but instead had quietly and calmly listened to every detail. In fact, Esme was so quiet and calm that it was disconcerting. A word which here means a warning that the Baudelaire children did not heed in time. This is the least smashing thing I have ever heard," Esme said, taking another sip of her beverage. "Let me see if I have understood everything you have said. Gunther is, in fact, Count Olaf in disguise." "Yes," Violet said. "His boots are covering up his tattoo, and his monocle makes him scrunch his face up to hide one of his eyebrows. His one eyebrow. And he has hidden away the Quagmires in a cage at the bottom of my elevator shaft," Esme said, putting her soda glass down on the nearby table. "Yes," Claus said. "There's no elevator behind those doors. Somehow Gunther removed it so he could use the shaft as a secret passageway. And now he's taken the Quagmires out of the cage," Esme continued, "and is going to smuggle them out of the city by hiding them inside lot 50 of the inn auction." Caxret, Sunny said, which meant, "You got it, Esme." This is certainly a complicated plot, Esme said. I'm surprised that young children, such as yourself, were able to figure it out, but I'm glad you did. She paused for a moment and removed a speck of dust from one of her fingernails. And now there's only one thing to do. We'll rush right to Veblen Hall and put a stop to this terrible scheme. We'll have Gunther arrested and the quagmire set free. We'd better leave right this minute. Esme stood up and beckoned to the children with a faint smile. The children followed her out of the sitting room and past 12 kitchens to the front door, exchanging puzzled glances. Their guardian was right, of course, that they should go to Veblen Hall and expose Gunther and his treachery, but they couldn't help wondering why the city's sixth most important financial advisor was so calm when she said it. The children were so anxious about the quagmire that they felt as if they were jumping out of their skin, but Esme led the Baudelaires out of the penthouse as if they were going to the grocery store to purchase the whole wheat flour instead of rushing to an auction to stop a horrible crime. As she shut the door of the apartment, she turned to smile at the children again. The three siblings could see no sign of anxiousness on her face, and it was disconcerting. Claus and I will take turns carrying you, Sunny, Violet said, lifting her sister up. That way the trip down the stairs will be easier for you. Oh, we don't have to walk down all those stairs, Esme said. That's true, Claus said. Sliding down the banister would be much quicker. Esme put one arm around the children and began walking them away from the front door. It was nice to receive an affectionate gesture from their guardian, but her arm was wrapped so tightly that they could scarcely move, which was also disconcerting. We won't have to slide down the banisters either, she said. Then how will we get down from this penthouse? Violet asked. Esme stretched out her other arm and used one of her long fingernails to press the up button next to the sliding doors. This was the most disconcerting thing of all, but by now, I'm sorry to say, it was late. Too late. We'll take the elevator, she said, as the door slid open, and then, with one last smile, she swept her arm forward and pushed the Baudelaire orphans into the darkness of the elevator shaft. Blackness. Sometimes words are not enough. There are some circumstances so utterly wretched that I cannot describe them in sentences or paragraphs or even a whole series of books. And the terror and woe that the Baudelaire orphans felt after Esme pushed them into the elevator shaft is one of the most dreadful circumstances that can be represented only with 2 pages of utter blackness. I have no words for the profound horror that the children felt as they tumbled into the darkness. I can think of no sentence that can convey how loudly they screamed or how cold the air was as it whooshed around them while they fell. And there is no paragraph I could possibly type that would enable you to imagine how frightened the Baudelaires were as they plunged down towards certain doom. But I can tell you that they did not die. Not one hair in their heads had been harmed by the time the children finally stopped tumbling through the darkness. They survived the fall from the top of the shaft for the one simple reason that they did not reach the bottom. Something broke their fall. A phrase which here means that the Baudelaire's plunge was stopped halfway between the sliding elevator doors and the metal cage where the quagmires had been locked up. Something broke their fall without even injuring them. And though it at first felt like a miracle, when the children understood that they were alive and no longer falling, they reached out their hands and soon realized that it felt a lot more like a net. While the Baudelaires were reading the catalogue of the end auction and telling Esme what they had learned, someone had stretched a rope net across the entire passageway, and it was this net that had stopped the children from plunging to their doom. Far, far above the orphans was the squalid penthouse, and far below them was the cage and the tiny, filthy room with the hallway leading out of it. The Baudelaire orphans were trapped. But it is far better to be trapped than to be dead, and the 3 children hugged each other in relief that something had broken their fall. "Spence it," Sunny said, in a voice hoarse from screaming. "Yes, Sunny," Violet said, holding her close. "We're alive." She sounded as if she were talking to her She sounded as if she were talking as much to herself as to her sister. "We're alive," Claus said, hugging them both. "We're alive, and we're okay." "I wouldn't say you were okay," Esme's voice called down to them from the top of the passageway. Her voice echoed off to the walls of the passageway, but the children could still hear every cruel word. "You're alive, but you're definitely not okay. As soon as the auction is over and the quagmires are on their way out of the city, Gunther will come and get you, and I will guarantee that you 3 orphans will never be okay again. What a wonderful and profitable day. My former acting teacher will finally get his hands on not 1, but 2 enormous fortunes." Your former acting teacher, Violet asked in horror. You mean you've known Gunther's true identity the entire time? Of course I did, Esme said. I just had to fool you kids and my dim-witted husband into thinking he was really an auctioneer. Luckily, I am a smashing actress, so it was an easy trick. It was easy to trick you. So you've been working together with that terrible villain? Claus called up to her. How could you have done that to us? He's not a terrible villain, Esme said. He's a genius. I instructed the doorman not to let you out of the penthouse until Gunther came and retrieved you. But Gunther convinced me that throwing you down there was a better idea, and he was right. Now there's no way you'll make it to the auction and mess up our plans. Zizzle, Sunny shrieked. My sister is right, Violet cried. You're our guardian. You're supposed to be keeping us safe, not throwing us down elevator shafts and stealing our fortune. But I want to steal it from you, Esme said. I want to steal from you the way Baudelaire, Beatrice stole from me. What are you talking about? Claus asked. You're already unbelievably wealthy. Why do you want even more money? Because it's in, of course, Esme said. Well, toodaloo, children. Toodaloo is the inn way of saying goodbye to 3 bratty orphans you're never going to see again. Why? Violet cried. Why are you treating us so terribly? Esme's answer to this question was the cruelest of all, and like a fall down the elevator shaft, there are no words for her reply. She merely laughed a loud, cruel cackle that bounced off the walls of the passageway and then faded into silence as their guardian walked away. The Baudelaire orphans looked at one another, or tried to look at one another in the darkness, and trembled in disgust and fear, shaking the net that had trapped them and saved them at the same time. Diley, Sunny said miserably, and her siblings knew what she meant. What are we going to do? I don't know, Claus said, but we've got to do something. And we've got to do it quickly, Violet added. But this is a very difficult situation. There's no use climbing up or down. The walls feel too smooth. Well, there's no use in making a lot of noise to try and get someone's attention, Claus said. Even if anybody hears us, they'll just think someone is yelling in one of the apartments. Violet closed her eyes in thought, and although it was so dark that it didn't really make a difference if her eyes were closed or open. Claus, maybe this time is right for your researching skills, she said after a moment. Can you think of some moment in history when people got out of a trap like this one? I don't think so, Claus replied sadly. In the myth of Hercules, he's trapped between 2 monsters named Scylla and Charybdis, just like we're trapped between the sliding doors and the floor. But he got out of the trap by turning them into whirlpools. Glaucus, Sunny said, which meant something like, but we can't do that. I know, Claus said glumly. Myths are often entertaining, but they're never very helpful. Maybe the time is right for one of Violet's inventions. But I don't have any materials to work with, Violet said, reaching out her hand to feel the edges of the net. I can't use this net for an invention because if I start to tear it up, we'll fall. The net seems to be attached to the walls with little metal pegs that stick into the walls, but I can't pull those out and use them either. Gryzan? Sunny asked. Yes, Violet replied. Pegs. Feel right here. Sunny, Gunther probably stood on a long ladder to drive these pegs into the wall of the passageway and then strung the net across the pegs. I guess the walls of the elevator shaft are soft enough that sharp objects can be stuck into them. Thok? Sunny asked, which meant, like teeth? And instantly her siblings knew what she was thinking. No, Sunny, Violet said, you can't climb up the elevator shaft by using your teeth. It's too dangerous. You get, Sunny pointed out, which meant, if I fall, I'll just fall back into the net. But what if you get stuck halfway up, Claus said, or what if you lose a tooth? Basta, Sunny said, which meant I'll just have to risk it. It's our only hope. And her siblings reluctantly agreed. They did not like the idea of their baby sister climbing up to the sliding doors of the Ersatz Elevator using only her teeth, but they could think of no other way to escape in time to foil Gunther's plan. The time wasn't right for Violet's inventing skills, or for the knowledge Claus had from reading, but the time was right for Sunny's sharp teeth, and the youngest Baudelaire tilted her head back and then swung forward, sticking one of her teeth into the wall with a rough sound that would make any dentist weep for hours. But the Baudelaires were not dentists, and the 3 children listened closely into the darkness to hear if Sunny's tooth would stick as firmly as the net pegs. To their delight, they heard nothing. No scraping or sliding or cracking or anything that would indicate that Sunny's teeth wouldn't hold. Sunny even shook her head a little bit to see if it would easily dislodge her tooth from the wall, but it remained a firm tooth hold. Sunny swung her head slightly and embedded another tooth slightly above the first. The second tooth stuck, so Sunny carefully eased out the first tooth and inserted it once more in the wall, slightly above the second tooth. By spacing her teeth slightly apart, Sunny had moved a few inches up the wall, and by the time she stuck her first tooth above the second one again, her little body was no longer touching the net. "Good luck, Sunny," Violet said. "We're rooting for you, Sunny," Claus said. Sunny did not reply, but her siblings were not alarmed because they imagined it was difficult to say much when you had a mouthful of wall. So Violet and Claus merely sat on their net and continued to call up encouragement to their baby sister. Had Sunny been able to climb and speak at the same time, she might have said "Sreed," which meant something like "so far, so good," or "yeah," which meant "I think I've reached the halfway point." But the two older Baudelaires heard nothing but the sound of teeth inserting and attaching themselves in the dark, until Sunny triumphantly called down the word "tap." "Oh, Sunny," Claus cried, "you did it!" "Way to go," Violet called up. "Now go get our makeshift rope from under the bed, and we'll climb up and join you." Here's a picture. Gone, boss," Sunny called back, and crawled off. The two older siblings sat and waited in the darkness for a while, marveling at their sister's skills. "I couldn't have climbed all the way up this passageway," Violet said, "not when I was Sunny's age." "Me neither," Claus said, "although we both have regular-sized teeth." "It's not just the size of her teeth," Violet said. "It's the size of her courage, and the size of her concern for her siblings." "And the size of trouble we're in," Claus added, "and the size of our guardian's treachery. I can't believe Esme was scheming together with Gunther the entire time. She's as ersatz as our elevator." "Esme's a pretty good actress," Violet said comfortingly. "Even though she's a terrible person, she had us completely fooled that Gunther had her completely fooled." But what was she talking about when she said, "Ta-da!" Sunny called down from the sliding doors. "She has the rope," Violet said excitedly. "Tie it to the doorknob, Sunny, using the devil's tongue." "No," Claus said. "I have a better idea." "A better idea than climbing out of here?" Violet asked. "I want to climb out of here," Claus said, "but I don't think we should climb up. Then we'll just be at the penthouse." "But from the penthouse," Violet said, "we can get to Veblen Hall. We can even slide down the banisters to save time." "But at the end of the banisters," Claus said, "is the lobby of the building, and in the lobby is a doorman with strict instructions not to let us leave." "I hadn't thought about him," Violet said. "He always follows instructions." "That's why we've got to leave 667 Dark Avenue another way," Claus said. "Detamu," Sunny called, which meant, "What other way is there?" "Down," Claus said. "That tiny room at the bottom of the elevator shaft has a hallway leading out of it, remember? It's right next to the cage." "That's true," Violet said. "That must be how Gunther snatched the quagmires away before we could rescue them. But who knows where it leads?" "Well, if Gunther took the quagmires down the hallway," Claus said, "it must lead somewhere near Veblen Hall, and that's precisely where we want to go." "You're right," Violet said. "Sunny, forget about tying the rope to the doorknob. Someone might see it, anyway, and realize we've escaped. Just bring it down here. Do you think you can bite your way back down?" "Geronimo!" Sunny cried, which meant, "I don't need to bite my way back down." And the youngest Baudelaire was right. She took a deep breath and threw herself down the dark passageway, the coil of ersatz rope trailing behind her. This time the plunge does not need to be represented by pages of darkness, because the terror of the long dark fall was alleviated. The word alleviated here means not particularly in Sunny's mind, because the youngest Baudelaire knew that Annette and her siblings were waiting for her at the bottom. With a thump, Sunny landed on the net, and with a slightly smaller thump, the coil of a rope landed next to her. After making sure her sister was unharmed by the fall, Violet began tying one end of the rope to one of the pegs holding the net in place. "I'm sure this end of the rope is secured," Violet said. "Sunny, if your teeth aren't too sore from the climb, use them to cut a hole in the net so we can climb through it." "What can I do?" Claus asked. "You can pray this works," Violet said. But the Baudelaire sisters were so quick with their task that there was no time for even the shortest of religious ceremonies. In a matter of moments, Violet had attached the rope to the peg with some complicated and powerful knots, and Sunny had cut a child-sized hole in the middle of the net. Violet dangled the rope down the hole, and the three children listened until they heard the familiar clink of their ersatz rope against the metal cage. The Baudelaire orphans paused for a moment at the hole in the net and stared down into the blackness. "I can't believe we're climbing down this passageway again," Violet said. "I know what you mean," Claus said. "If someone had asked me that day at the beach if I ever thought we'd be climbing up and down an elevator shaft in an attempt to rescue a pair of triplets, I would have never said never in a million years. And now we're doing it for the 5th time in 24 hours. What happened to us? What led us to this awful place we're staring at now? Misfortune, Violet said quietly. A terrible fire, Claus said. Olaf, Sunny said decisively, and began crawling down the rope. Claus followed his sister down through the rope of the net, down through the hole of the net, and Violet followed Claus, and the 3 Baudelaires made the long trek down the bottom half of the passageway until they reached the tiny, filthy room, the empty cage, and the hallway that they hoped would lead them to the inn auction. Sunny squinted up at the rope, making sure that her siblings had safely reached the bottom. Claus squinted at the hallway, trying to see how long it was, or if there was anybody or anything lurking in it. And Violet squinted in the corner at the welding torches the children had thrown in the corner when the time had not been ripe to use them. We should take these with us, she said. But why? Claus asked. They've certainly cooled off long ago. They have, Violet said, picking one up, and the tips are all bent from throwing them in the corner. But they still might come in handy for something. We don't know what we'll encounter in the hallway, and I don't want to come up short-handed. Here, Claus. Here's yours, and here's Sunny's. The younger Baudelaires took the bent, cooled fire tongs, and then, sticking close to one another, all 3 children took their first few steps down the hallway. In the utter darkness of this terrible place, the fire tongs seemed like long, slender extensions of the Baudelaires' hands, instead of inventions that they were each holding. But this was not what Violet had meant when she said she didn't want them to be short-handed. Short-handed is a word which here means unprepared, and Violet was thinking that the 3 children alone in a dark hallway holding fire tongs were perhaps a bit more prepared than 3 children alone in a dark hallway holding nothing at all. And I'm sorry to tell you that the eldest Baudelaire was absolutely right. The 3 children couldn't afford to be short-handed at all, not with the unfair advantage that was lurking at the end of their walk. As they took one cautious step after another, the Baudelaire orphans needed to be as long-handed as possible for the element of surprise that was waiting for them when the dark hallway came to an end. Chapter 11 for next time.